She told me, "Don't tempt me." I smiled and whispered back, "Then stop looking at me like that." And in that moment, everything between us changed. I never expected the first spark to feel so quiet. It wasn't the kind of meeting that novels are written about, no grand gestures, no cinematic music. It happened on an ordinary evening, in an ordinary place, and yet it shifted something in me. She was sitting at the far end of the cafe, tucked into the corner where the light was softer. Her posture was poised but relaxed, a mix of elegance and ease. She was older, that much was clear from the wisdom written in her eyes and the calm way she carried herself. But there was something else too, something that made it hard to look away, a quiet energy, as though the room bent slightly toward her without her asking. I told myself I was just noticing, nothing more. But the truth is, the moment our eyes met, something stirred inside me, the kind of awareness you can't unfeel once it begins. She glanced up, caught me looking, and instead of turning away quickly, she held my gaze just a second longer than necessary. A small smile followed, not deliberate, almost like her expression betrayed something she hadn't planned to reveal. When I walked over to order my coffee, I noticed details I shouldn't have cared about. The way she adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan, the faint trace of perfume carried on the air when she shifted in her seat, the way her hand curved delicately around the edge of her cup. They weren't dramatic movements, but they held my attention as if they were. We spoke for the first time because the cafe was crowded, and my table stood empty. She gestured lightly, almost without thinking, and asked if I wanted to sit across from her. Her tone was casual, but I caught the quick lift of her brow, the kind of gesture people make when they're testing the waters. Our conversation started with the obvious: the weather, the coffee, the crowded space. But the way she listened made even those simple words feel different. She leaned forward slightly, her chin resting near her knuckles, her eyes never darting away the way most people's do. There was something deliberate in her attention, something that made me feel as though I mattered more than the words themselves. I found myself watching the curve of her lips as she spoke, the way her laugh came quietly at first, then fuller, freer, as though she was surprised by herself. And every time I thought the moment might settle into something ordinary, there was another spark, the brush of her hand against mine when we reached for the sugar, the warmth in her glance when she caught me smiling. It was subtle, so subtle that no one else in the cafe would have noticed. But between us, it felt like the beginning of something neither of us had asked for, and both of us already felt. That evening, as I walked home with the taste of coffee still on my tongue, I kept replaying that small smile she gave me, the one she hadn't meant to show. I didn't know then how much weight that single moment would carry. All I knew was this: something had shifted, and there was no turning back. It started innocently enough, the way all things that matter often do. After that first meeting, I didn't expect to see her again so soon. But life has a way of weaving people into your path when you least expect it. A week later, I found her in the same cafe, sitting at the same table, as though the world had saved that corner just for her. She smiled when she noticed me. Not a polite smile meant for strangers, but something softer, warmer, almost like recognition. I felt it in my chest, a subtle pull that told me this wasn't chance anymore. We began to share the table without much thought. She'd bring her book, I'd bring my laptop, and for a while we'd sit in companionable silence. But silence with her wasn't empty, it carried a hum, like electricity beneath the surface. I found myself glancing up just to catch her brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, or adjusting her glasses as she read. Little things, but they stayed with me long after. Our conversations grew slowly, branching out from small talk into deeper ground. She told me stories about the city, about places she loved, about the comfort of routines she'd built over the years. I listened, fascinated not by the details but by the way her voice shifted when she spoke about things that mattered. There was a warmth there, and sometimes, a hint of sadness she didn't elaborate on. What struck me most was how she listened in return. People often wait for their turn to speak, but she never did. She leaned in when I talked, as if my words carried weight. It made me want to give her more of myself, to offer the truths I usually kept hidden. One afternoon, our hands brushed when I passed her a napkin. It was nothing, a fleeting touch, skin against skin. But it was enough to make my breath catch. She didn't pull away quickly, not the way most would. Instead, her fingers lingered a second too long, then curled back slowly as if she'd reminded herself of the line she shouldn't cross. That line hung between us more often after that. When she laughed and tilted her head back, I noticed the way her eyes softened as they landed on me again. When she leaned forward, her shoulder nearly brushed mine, and though we both stayed composed, the space between us felt charged, almost dangerous. I began to realize something quietly unsettling. Being around her didn't feel like an accident anymore. It felt like a choice. A choice we both kept making, day after day, without speaking it aloud. And in those moments, in the way her gaze lingered, in the curve of her smile, in the silence we both pretended not to notice, I knew we were stepping into something neither of us fully understood, but neither of us truly wanted to stop. There's a strange kind of danger in comfort. The more time we spent together, the easier it became to forget the boundaries that should have kept us apart. What began as chance meetings turned into a pattern, a rhythm I quietly began to crave. She didn't push me away, and I didn't keep my distance. Somewhere between laughter and silence, a tension grew, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. That day, we sat by the window as rain tapped against the glass. The cafe was half empty, the world outside muted by the storm. She was telling me about a mistake she'd made years ago, one of those stories you share only when trust feels natural. I watched her eyes as she spoke, how they shifted between amusement at her younger self and the flicker of regret she tried to hide. I teased her lightly, just enough to make her laugh. The sound of it filled the small space between us, warm and unguarded. She nudged my hand with hers playfully, a gesture so simple and yet so intimate it made my chest tighten. "Careful," I said with a smile. "You're starting to tempt me." Her laughter stilled. For a moment, the air seemed to thicken, like the pause between one heartbeat and the next. She looked at me, not with amusement now, but with something deeper, something she hadn't meant to let slip. Her voice softened, almost a whisper, as she answered, "Don't tempt me." The words weren't stern. They weren't playful either. They carried weight, as though she was warning herself as much as she was warning me. I could have laughed it off, changed the subject, let the moment dissolve into nothing. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because beneath her words I heard the truth she wasn't ready to say. She felt it too. I leaned in just slightly, close enough that she couldn't mistake my sincerity, but still careful not to cross the line. "Then stop looking at me like that," I whispered. Her breath caught. I noticed the way her fingers curled against her cup, steadying herself. Her eyes searched mine, not with anger, not even with denial, but with hesitation, as though she stood at the edge of a choice she wasn't ready to make. The silence between us stretched long. The rain outside filled the space with its steady rhythm, and for the first time, our usual ease was gone. In its place was something rawer, heavier, impossible to ignore. She smiled then, faintly, almost unwillingly. It wasn't the kind of smile that dismissed me. It was the kind that admitted she had no defense left. And in that single moment, I realized how fragile the line was, the one between friendship and something far more dangerous. We were already standing on it, either of us ready to step back. The moment the words left my lips, "Then stop looking at me like that," the air between us shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no raised voices or sudden movements, just a quiet stillness that seemed to swallow everything else. Even the sound of the rain outside, steady and familiar, felt muffled, as though the world was holding its breath with us. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped, landing on the rim of her cup, fingers tracing the edge absent-mindedly. It wasn't avoidance, not exactly. It was more like she was gathering herself, deciding how much of her heart she could risk showing. I waited. My pulse thudded in my ears, every second stretching longer than it should. In that silence, 100 doubts raced through me. Had I gone too far? Had I broken the fragile balance we built? When she finally looked up, her eyes held mine with a steadiness that unsettled me. She didn't smile this time. Instead, there was a softness, almost a plea, hidden in the way her lips parted but refused to form words. Her silence spoke louder than anything she might have said. I noticed the small details, the kind you only see when you're desperate for answers. The faint tremor in her hand as she lifted her cup. The way her shoulders rose and fell a little faster than before. The slight parting of her lips, like she was caught between confession and restraint. She didn't deny it. She didn't tell me I was wrong. And that, somehow, was the loudest truth of all. I leaned back slightly, trying to ease the tension, though inside I felt anything but calm. You don't have to say it, I murmured, almost afraid of breaking the spell. Her eyes softened then, just enough to show me the storm she was holding back. She shook her head faintly, a small, helpless motion. Then, finally, a smile flickered at the corners of her mouth, brief, reluctant, but telling. It wasn't the smile of someone amused. It was the smile of someone caught, someone who knew the truth was already out, even if she couldn't give it words. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything we hadn't said, everything we'd been circling around for weeks. I could feel it in the way her gaze lingered, in the way her hand tightened around her cup, in the unspoken invitation of that fragile smile. In that moment, I realized something that both thrilled and terrified me. We weren't pretending anymore. Whatever this was, whatever line we'd been dancing around, it was real. And though she couldn't say it, though she chose silence over confession, her eyes told me what her words couldn't. She wanted this as much as I did. The silence between us lingered long after that day. Even when we saw each other again, it hung quietly in the background, like a shadow neither of us wanted to name. We spoke of ordinary things, books, work, the weather, but beneath every word was the weight of what hadn't been said. One evening, the cafe was unusually empty. The air outside was cool, and inside the lights seemed softer, gentler, as though the room itself wanted to give us space. She sat across from me, her hands folded neatly around her cup, but her gaze wasn't steady tonight. She kept glancing toward the window, as if gathering the courage to look anywhere but at me. I noticed the way her shoulders carried a heaviness, a kind of tension she usually kept hidden beneath her calm. I leaned forward, trying to bridge the distance. You're quiet tonight, I said softly. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh but without the sound of amusement. Sometimes I wonder if I've lost my mind, she murmured, still not meeting my eyes. My chest tightened. I wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her voice told me not to rush. Instead, I waited, giving her the silence she seemed to need. Finally, she looked at me. Her eyes held a mixture of strength and vulnerability, as though she'd built walls all her life and for once was willing to let one crack. You make me forget myself, she said quietly. And I don't know if that's beautiful or reckless. Her words hit harder than I expected. There was no teasing in her tone, no shield of humor. Just truth, raw, fragile truth. I reached across the table, not grabbing, not forcing, just letting my hand rest close to hers. Slowly, hesitantly, she let her fingers slide into mine. Her touch was warm, tentative at first, then firmer, as though she was testing whether I would let go. I don't want you to feel reckless, I said, my voice low. I want you to feel safe with me. Her lips parted, and for a moment I thought she might pull her hand away. But she didn't. Instead, she lowered her gaze to where our hands touched, her thumb brushing lightly against my skin. You're younger, she whispered, almost to herself. People would talk. They wouldn't understand. I squeezed her hand gently, steadying her. Let them talk. They don't see you the way I do. Her breath trembled as she exhaled. She didn't argue, didn't push me away. For the first time, she let herself stay in that closeness without retreating. Her walls weren't gone, but for this moment, at least, she'd chosen to let me inside. And in that small, fragile confession, I felt the beginning of something deeper. Something we could no longer pretend wasn't real. After her confession, something shifted between us. It wasn't loud or dramatic, no sudden declarations, no rush of passion. It was quieter, more fragile, like the moment when the tide changes direction but the waves haven't caught up yet. I could feel it in the way she moved, in the way her voice softened around me. She was still guarded, but no longer untouchable. That evening, we found ourselves sitting together outside the cafe instead of inside. The rain had stopped earlier, leaving the air cool and fresh, with the faint scent of wet earth lingering. Street lamps cast pools of light along the pavement, and beyond that, the city hummed in the distance, alive but far enough away to leave us undisturbed. We sat side by side on a wooden bench, our shoulders close enough to feel the heat of each other's presence. Neither of us rushed to speak. The quiet was different now, not awkward, not empty, but heavy with things that hovered just beyond words. I glanced at her profile, the soft curve of her jaw, the way her hair fell against her cheek. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't frowning either. Her expression was unreadable, and yet I sensed the storm inside her. "You're thinking too much," I said gently. Her lips curved into a small, almost rueful smile. "That's all I ever do," she admitted. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, her fingers twisted together in her lap, restless, unsure. Without overthinking, I reached down and let my hand brush against hers. At first, she froze. I could feel the hesitation in her stillness, as if she was calculating the cost of such a simple touch. But then, slowly, her fingers relaxed, opening just enough to let mine slide between them. We stayed that way, hand in hand, for what felt like forever. No words. No explanations. Just the quiet thrum of two people caught between fear and desire. Finally, she turned her head and looked at me. Not with the careful composure she usually carried, but with something raw, something searching. Her eyes asked questions her lips couldn't shape. "Can I trust this? Can I trust you?" I didn't answer with words. Instead, I let the closeness speak for me. I leaned in slightly, not enough to force, but enough to show her I was here, waiting, patient. She didn't move at first. Her gaze dropped to my lips, then back to my eyes. I felt her breath brush against my cheek, warm and uncertain. For a heartbeat, I thought she might pull away. But then she stayed. Just stayed. And in that stillness, I understood, she had made her choice. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a declaration. It was quieter than that, but no less powerful. She trusted me, at least in this moment. And that was enough. The stillness between us stretched on until it became something unbreakable, something that no amount of words could capture. Sitting there on that bench, her hand in mine, I realized how rare it was to feel this way, not rushed, not forced, just present. She hadn't pulled away. That alone felt like a victory, though I knew better than to call it that. This wasn't a game, and she wasn't a prize to be won. She was a woman standing at the edge of something risky, and I could see the weight of that choice in the way her eyes lingered on mine. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, steady, but carrying the fragility of someone admitting a truth they had tried hard to bury. "You scare me," she said. The words hit harder than I expected, but not in the way I thought they would. It wasn't rejection. It was honesty. She was afraid because what we had already mattered, too much to dismiss, too much to laugh away. I squeezed her hand gently. "I'm scared too," I admitted. "But maybe that's how we know it's real." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that didn't hide her doubt but softened it. She turned toward me then, closing the small distance that had been haunting us for weeks. Her head rested against my shoulder, light at first, then firmer, as though she was letting herself believe I could hold some of her weight. The simple act made my chest tighten. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her just close enough to let her know she was safe there. She exhaled slowly, her breath warming the fabric of my shirt, and I felt her whole body soften against me. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The intimacy of that embrace carried more meaning than any rushed gesture could. Her hand rested lightly on my chest, right over my heartbeat, as though she needed to feel proof that I was steady even when everything else felt uncertain. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "I don't know where it can go." I tilted my head slightly, resting my cheek against her hair. We don't have to know. Not yet. We just don't have to pretend anymore. Her silence was an answer in itself. She didn't move away. She didn't argue. She stayed. We sat there long after the street lamps flickered on, wrapped in the quiet rhythm of the night. For once, there were no barriers, no careful walls. Just two people holding on to a moment they'd both been afraid to reach for. And maybe that was enough. Not certainty, not promises of forever. Just honesty, closeness, and the fragile beginning of something that felt worth the risk. When she finally lifted her head to meet my eyes again, there was no more denial in her gaze. Only acceptance. Whatever this was, we were in it together now, unsure of the future, but unwilling to let go. And that was more than enough for me.